We know the Brooklyn Nets today as a team that has some of the most star power on its roster of any team ever. But before the big free agent signings and trades of the past 2 years, the Nets were a bottom tier team in the NBA for much of the 2010s. To break that cycle of failure, the team made big moves. They took the team from New Jersey to Brooklyn. They pushed through legal controversies to build a luxurious arena, and came under ownership of one of the richest men in Russia. While everything was in place to be a great organization, they were missing one key element: players. In an attempt to gain everything, the team ended up losing it all. This is the story of how the Brooklyn Nets made the worst trade in NBA history. When Bruce Ratner bought the New Jersey Nets in 2004, it wasn't because he was some big basketball fanatic. Ratner, a wealthy real estate developer in New York, bought the team to use as a pawn in his large-scale real estate development that he wanted to build in Brooklyn. Called the Atlantic Yards Project, Ratner's idea was to build skyscrapers, office space, housing, and of course, a world-class arena. But what's a billion-dollar arena without a team to fill it? So naturally, Ratner went out and got one. As you can imagine, buying an NBA team without caring about the NBA isn't a good idea if on-court success is your goal. In Ratner's 6 full seasons as owner, the team had a record of 212 and 280, including a horrific 12-70 in his final season. Building a new arena isn't cheap, and the Nets were losing money. They reportedly lost over $77 million in 2008 to 2009. With declining fan interest, an abysmal product on the court, a plethora of legal delays with the new arena, as well as a global economic collapse, Ratner couldn't afford to own the team anymore. In 2010, he sold his stake to Mikhail Prokhorov, a Russian billionaire whose funding would allow the team to continue building the arena and eventually move the team to Brooklyn. When Prokhorov took over in 2010, he had high hopes that the team could quickly turn around its on-court product. He said, "If everything goes as planned, I expect to be in the playoffs next season, and championship in 1 year minimum and maximum 5 years." This was obviously a bold claim, as the Nets were coming off one of the worst seasons in NBA history. To do this, there would have to be a rapid talent upgrade in a very short time under Prokhorov for him to keep his promise. The Nets showed commitment with their first step to improving their roster by trading for all-star point guard Deron Williams. The Nets made moderate improvement in the 2010-2011 season, going 24-58 to finish tied for the fifth worst record in the league. In a lockout-shortened 2011-2012 season, they went 22-44, again tied for the fifth worst record in the league. However, there was some excitement on the horizon, because this was their last season playing in New Jersey. So while the team itself still wasn't where it wanted to be, there was reason to believe that they could rejuvenate fan interest and become a more desirable place to play, in Brooklyn. With the Barclays Center open for the 2012-2013 season, the Nets front office made sure the team that was coming to Brooklyn would be even better. In that offseason, the Nets traded for all-star wing Joe Johnson from the Atlanta Hawks. They agreed to send Atlanta expiring contracts and a future first-round pick so the Hawks could free up cap space. Johnson came with a huge $90 million contract, but the Nets wanted better players and were willing to do whatever it took to get them. With Johnson, Williams, and the emergence of young big man Brook Lopez, the Nets turned their record around and went 49-33 to make the playoffs for the first time under Prokhorov. However, they lost their first playoff series in 7 games to the Chicago Bulls. Remember that Prokhorov promised a championship within 5 seasons. They were now 3 seasons in and hadn't won a playoff series. To fulfill his promise to the fan base, the Nets would need to upgrade their talent on the roster significantly. With Johnson and Williams entering the end of their primes, the Nets' time to win was now. Meanwhile in Boston, the Celtics had become a middle-of-the-road team. After their 2008 championship, the team had steadily declined to the point of no longer being a contender. With the aging duo of Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett, the Celtics were looking to move on from their stars that brought them a ring and start the rebuilding process. Garnett was 36 but just came off an All-Star appearance, and Pierce was 35 but just came off a season where he averaged 19 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists. So the Celtics wanted to ship them away while they still seemingly had value, maybe to a team that was in win-now mode. Sound familiar? As the Nets were 3 years into Prokhorov's promise of a championship and looking to further energize a new fan base, they were in the market for quality players, even if they didn't have many years left in the tank. The first negotiations between the Celtics and Nets only included Pierce in exchange for 1 draft pick and 2 role players. Celtics head coach Doc Rivers, the the one who had coached them to the championship in 2008, ended up leaving though for the Clippers. That was the Celtics' sign that it was time to fully enter rebuild mode, and now Garnett's name was coming up in trade talks with the Nets as well. So 2 first-round picks and some role players for Garnett and Pierce, right? Not so fast. The Nets needed to get rid of Gerald Wallace's massive contract to make the trade work. For that, they needed to throw in another first-round pick to the Celtics. After extensive talks, the Celtics also got the Nets to include a pick swap in 2017. So the final haul was Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Jason Terry to Brooklyn for Gerald Wallace, Chris Humphries, Marshawn Brooks, Keith Bogans, Chris Joseph, and the Nets' 2014, 2016, and 2018 first-round picks, as well as the right to swap picks in 2017. If you're thinking that's a massive haul for the Celtics, you'd be correct. And it's not the first time the Nets GM Billy King threw tons of picks into deals. To acquire Gerald Wallace, Joe Johnson, and Darren Williams collectively, it cost the Nets 4 first-round picks. And the pick that was dealt to Portland for Wallace ended up being used to select Damian Lillard. Yes, Damian Lillard could have been a Net. But maybe this trade would be different. However, King was notorious for overpaying to finish deals once negotiations started. According to another NBA executive, Billy's literally like an addicted gambler when he's close to doing those trades. He'll do anything when it reaches a certain point. The Nets were taking a massive gamble, but if they could win a championship before all of their stars became too old, then it would be worth it. And the general consensus after the trade was that it was a great move for the Nets. 75% of NBA GMs picked the Nets to win the Atlantic Division. Ticket sales and fan interest skyrocketed. Everything was looking up. That was until the game started. Garnett was not the player from the year before. He was on a minutes restriction, missed 30 games, and averaged just 6 points per game. At 37 years old, a drop-off is to be expected, but still, he was an all-star the year prior. Pierce never seemed like he wanted to be in Brooklyn, and that showed through on the court. He finished the season averaging 14, 5, and 2, all down considerably from the year prior. Jason Terry averaged just 4.5 points per game before getting traded for Marcus Thornton mid-season. Darren Williams had health issues, and his stats declined across the board as well. The Nets finished the 2013-2014 season 44-38, good for the 6th seed in the East. After squeaking by the Bulls in 7 games in the first round, the Nets promptly lost to LeBron and the Heat in just 5 games. After just 1 season as head coach, Jason Kidd was gone to Milwaukee. Just 1 season after the mega trade deal, Paul Pierce left to go to Washington. Garnett stuck around for another half season before eventually getting traded away for Thaddeus Young. Just so we're all on the same page here, the Nets essentially traded 3 first-round picks in a pick swap for Marcus Thornton, Thaddeus Young, and a subpar season of Garnett, Pierce, and Terry. The next season, the Nets went 38-44, barely made the playoffs as an 8th seed, and then lost in the first round. At this point, it's clear that this trade was awful for the Nets. However, it's far from over. Where the real pain comes in for them is from what the Celtics were able to do with the picks. The Celtics used the Nets' 2014 pick on James Young, who didn't pan out to be that great of a player. But they used the Nets' 2016 pick on Jaylen Brown, and he has since developed into one of the best wings in the league at just 25 years old. The Celtics then used their pick swap to take the Nets' 2017 pick. They landed the number 1 overall selection, then traded back to the 3rd pick from the 76ers, got an extra first-round pick from Philadelphia in the process, and landed Jayson Tatum at number 3. Tatum has become a star like Brown, and together they form the best young wing duo in the NBA. We're not done yet, though. The Celtics used the Nets' 2018 pick to send to Cleveland in exchange for Kyrie Irving. With that pick, the Cavs took Colin Sexton, who is a solid young point guard. So the final count on this trade is that the Nets traded essentially Jaylen Brown, Jayson Tatum, and Colin Sexton for 1 bad season of Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Jason Terry, as well as role players Marcus Thornton and Thaddeus Young. If that is not the biggest finesse in NBA history, I don't know what is. Desperation and greed ended up being the Nets' downfall. With an owner that didn't know much about basketball and just wanted championships without any thought of how the team should be run, they were doomed for failure. By throwing away their future for old players that all left within 2 years, helping their division rival to build their future, and sending themselves back into NBA irrelevancy for years afterwards, this is how the Brooklyn Nets made the worst trade deal in NBA history.